Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 50th video in our Master Series and the 20th video in our first phase processing and the 9th video in our effects step in that phase. So basically tonight we wanted to talk about distortion. So I love distortion. I could make 500 videos that were all an hour long on distortion because I studied distortion for a long time because I figured out that basically distortion is warping a sinusoid or adding other harmonics to it that actually adds distortion, which you can look at as sound. That basically it's what it is. So, I mean, besides noise. Now, we had talked about in the Master Series 35 about, that was the first video in sound sculpting, and we talked about all the tools you had to sculpt sound. Noise files, saturation, even harmonics, odd harmonics, and non-harmonic distortion for the most part, basically to sculpt the sound, the basic tools you have. And those are the same basic tools you have for creating distortion, just more aggressively. So the concept here, this video, I can go on and on and on, but I don't really recommend going and buying a bunch of plugins and all kinds of stuff to try to create different types of distortion. That I do it in Trash Tube because it's one of the few plugins that I found that I could create my own presets. I had to experiment around with it, and you can get in touch with me and I will send you the presets because I set up presets that create saturation, they create good square clipping, good clean square clipping, good clean saturation, odd harmonics, even and odd harmonics, and really aggressive full spectrum distortion. And it worked great. So we had talked about those tools, so I recommend you go there because it's an experimentation. As you add those different components in there, different types of noise files, saturation to varying degrees, even and odd harmonics and varying degrees of even and odd harmonics, and using them more aggressively to cause distortion can be different in every type of noise. I mean, if I want to dirty up a violin or a cello for some application, or a guitar, or a bass, or a vocalist, or whatever type of instrument that I'm dealing with, that I might add different things in there to get the sound that I want, which is going to be an experimentation. There's no, oh, you just add that and then you get this sound. What sound? What sound is it? I mean, you can create a lot of files, but I might not see that that would be the way you see it. So you may add more odd harmonics or a blue noise rather than me adding a brown noise because the way you think it should sound. So, and that's an artistic, creative conclusion that there's no way I'm going to be able to point that out to being the way that you would do it. So that makes it very difficult to show that. So basically it's an experimentation on your part with those tools that we talked about. And other than that, we come to, you know, the application itself of your plugins. Now, this is a huge problem because most of the time, most plugins don't give you real detailed information about what's happening there, or they expect that you understand that, you know, this is a distortion that's going to be caused from a transistor rather than a soft tube. What does that mean to you? Do you understand what that means? Is that even harmonics, odd harmonics, saturation? You know, is there non-harmonic distortion? This is non-harmonic distortion. You're seeing it right between this. These are basically odd harmonics coming off of this, and then they've got a slope, and then they're curving off really fast over here. But you look at all this non-harmonic distortion that's inherent all the way across the spectrum there. Now, that's not going to sound the exact same way as the saturation that we talked about because you're missing all these other harmonic content that would be in here someplace. So it's going to have a different sound, right? So it's a complicated concept. And plus you've got this going on over here. It almost looks like DC offset that's happening on the soft tube that you're going to probably want to filter out. Maybe not. You might want to leave it down there, but it might cause mud in your mix that you're going to want to put a high pass filter on there and filter that out of there. You know, that's going to interfere with your low end, your bass and your kick drum and things like that. That's going to be multiplied on top of that. You know, I don't know if you want that down there or not. And we talked about, as you go through different stages in sound sculpting, sometimes you want to filter. You might add this in here, and you might decide, I need to high pass filter this thing here to get that out of there, and then I'm going to low pass filter up to here, because I only want like the first, 4 harmonics. They're odd harmonics, but I only want, this is going to be like the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th harmonic or something. I want to filter everything off after that, side chained off into it with a channel splitter or sigmod that we had talked about, and then apply some other type of distortion again, on another channel that, shapes it a little differently. It's a huge process of trial and error. I remember when I was first trying to sound sculpt my guitar, because I'm a guitarist at heart. I love guitar. So I was trying to get this distortion that it sounded like, I wanted, and I started fussing around with it, and then I started, trying to figure out, just the slight differences. And I like guitarists like Steve Vai, Eddie Van Halen, Eric Johnson, stuff like that, because of the application that they do, the way they use the guitar to express themselves, and it's, it's an expressive thing that's an instrumental thing, and I love that kind of stuff, and I played guitar for a long time, and I figured out there was differences in there that were monumental in the sound, in the harmonic content, and what saturations, even in odd harmonics, how they sloped off, how they were tapered, the type of noise that were used in them, that there was huge differences in the distortion they used to get the sound that was inherent in the amplifiers they liked, in the processors they liked to use, in the type of distortion they used, and things like that. Caused a totally different effect that really didn't sound all that different if you just sat down and listened to it. But if you really get used to listening to it, you can tell the difference between their setups because of the sound. Completely, but they all had great performances and their stuff sounded great. So why is that? Because a lot of times the performer has technique. So it boils down to, once he starts working on his technique, he starts shaping his distortion around his technique so that it complements his technique. It's like, I heard a story one time of Sammy Hagar was trying to play Eddie Van Halen's guitar, and he was like, why don't I sound like Eddie Van Halen? It's his guitar, his setup, the whole 9 yards. It was like, because you don't have the technique of Eddie Van Halen, it's not going to sound the same. It has the same harmonic content because you're using the equipment, but your technique isn't, how do you say, using the equipment the way to enhance your technique, and vice versa. Does that make sense? So they kind of work together to help mold his technique. The equipment and his technique changed the whole way that he played. The Sammy Hagar was just not Van Halen, and it was not going to sound like Eddie Van Halen playing on it because of the way he played it. That's a kind of an abstract example, but it can be very true. So you have to kind of keep that in mind if you're a performer. But just using the distortion, that you really have to go through there and look at them. I'm looking at the soft tube. We talked about that link on my channel that you can go to the auto calculations and determine, even and odd harmonics from a calculator on that link. So you can check that out, because the difference between them, there's a soft tube, there's the hard tube on this plugin. You can see, watch the differences in the harmonic content. You can see the differences happen, the sloping off, the slope angle, what's going on back here, the non-harmonic distortion. Here's about this transistor, it's even in harmonics all the way across there. Some of them are lower than other ones, why is that? The algorithm, where that might be a little bit different in some other one that makes it sound just a little bit different. Fuzz, you got fuzz here, what's happening with fuzz? All these parameters, all these settings and different parameters that they have set on it are going to cause some other type of effect going on. Now, without it, it might give you a vague understanding what's happening, but as you understand what's going on with harmonic content and understand distortion, like I explained to you in Master Series 35 for the most part, and you'll have a better understanding of what's going on in there, because this is non-harmonic distortion. You can see it. It's not like saturation. In this one, it's like, in this one, it's just fuzz. So you got this normal harmonic distortion. All of a sudden, these ones came up, which was different when we were looking at this hard tube. This hard tube had this non-harmonic distortion in here, and look, it's at lower levels, or harder. And I go to the soft tube, and that harmonic distortion, non-harmonic distortion that's inherent, is way down low. And you don't even hardly see a lot of that other stuff except for way down here. Now that might be becoming apparent because this is getting boosted up to a higher level, and so you're being able to see it more. It's coming up louder, but that's not always the case. You know, it's adding different. You look at that on that soft tube, that there's hardly none of that happening. There's just these two harmonics, non-harmonic distortion. And one of these, you have to get out the calculator and figure out one of these is probably the one an even harmonic, and the other one's one that's a non-harmonic distortion, and you have to figure out what it is. And that can get really complicated. But it will help you to understand what's happening. So when you put on some other plug-in and you're experimenting around with other distortion pedals and things like that, that you got a little bit better understanding of what the heck that is. What is that crap? You know, I mean, what am I looking at? And that way that you can discern some plug-in that you get, and you start twisting parameters on it, and you're going, oh, what the hell is this thing doing? What is that? I can hear this little bit of difference, but what is that? It's not always so much as that it's like here, I turn this up here, and it's causing, more than likely one of these is the even harmonic, and some other non-harmonic distortion going on here and here. So that might not tell you nothing, and your ears are going to tell you whether you like that or not in some certain application. On this application, no. On this other application, yes. You know, does that make sense? Because it's having a different effect because of the harmonic content of the application you're trying to distort. Does that make sense? Whether it's a flute or oboe or synth or who knows what you're trying to distort. Does that mean add distortion to? So sometimes that's not real helpful. What is helpful is if you understand the basic components as it's adding in there, and you're hearing differences. As you hear differences, and the better you get at it, and the more, you know, the more experience you get with it, the better you will be at adding components in to get it distorted the way you want from experimentation and seeing those things and understanding those things and hearing the difference when those things are added in or subtracted. It'll make you that much better at using distortion and distorting things the way that you want them to sound. So I suggest you go back and watch that video on Master Series 35 and then get out your plugins and start seeing what they're adding to it, and start doing that stuff to different instruments and different applications, to vocals, guitars, bass, drums, you know, synthesizers, oboes, violins, all kinds of stuff, to see what it does when you add different things into it and what kind of effect that has on it. So peace, help, love. I hope you enjoyed this video on distortion and effects, and I will see you in the next video.